Every Monday through Friday, Sarah Bennett walked the same riverside street on her way to work. She was the kind of woman molded by modern life, always in a rush, one hand gripping her coffee, the other scrolling her phone. The world moved around her like a blur, and she had long forgotten how to pause. But there was one strange, persistent presence she unconsciously noted each day: an old man in a faded coat, sitting silently on a wooden bench beneath a birch tree. Along the Charles River, he never asked for money, never approached anyone, never spoke. He simply sat quietly breaking breadcrumbs for the pigeons that gathered at his feet. At first, Sarah paid him no mind. He was, in her eyes, no different from the stoplights or the bike racks in front of the library, just another part of the morning scenery. But one rainy autumn morning, something made her stop. The man was still sitting there, soaked to the soaked to the bone, his thin coat clinging to his frame, hands trembling as he shared the last piece of bread with a shivering pigeon. No umbrella, no complaints. Just a gentle act in the middle of a storm. Something stirred inside her chest. Almost instinctively, Sarah turned around, walked into the nearby cafe, bought a hot cup of tea and a muffin, and returned to the bench. She placed them beside him gently. He looked up surprised at first, then smiled. Quiet, kind smile, as if he had been waiting for that moment for a long time. "What's your name, sir?" she asked. "James," he replied, voice raspy but warm. "Thank you, young lady." And from that single moment, an invisible thread connected to strangers who had nothing in common. A thread that would one day lead to an ending neither of them could have foreseen. From that rainy morning on, Sarah began noticing James more deliberately. Every day, she'd stop by the cafe, pick up a tea and muffin, and walk them over to his bench. At first, their exchanges were brief, just a polite nod, a quiet thank you. But as the days grew colder and her visits more frequent, their conversations began to stretch. She learned he had once been a school teacher. History and literature, he told her, eyes brightening as if the memory warmed him. He had taught for over 30 years at a small community school before retiring early. When she asked why, he gave a soft, sad smile. "Life happened," he said, "and I didn't have anyone left to go home to." James had lost his wife too. Cancer a decade earlier. They had no children. After retiring, he sold the house and moved into a small apartment. But as the years went on, rent prices rose and his pension barely covered the essentials. Eventually, he lost his home. With no family to lean on, he chose the streets. "But I didn't want to be bitter," he said one morning as they watched. "The pigeons peck at breadcrumbs, so I came here every day. This river, these birds, they reminded me that life still has quiet moments." Sarah was stunned. The man she'd assumed was just another silent fixture of the city had lived a life full of love, purpose, and heartbreak. His voice carried the tone of someone who had accepted life's cruelty without letting it harden his heart. One particularly windy morning, Sarah noticed his hands trembling more than usual. His coat had holes near the cuffs, and his shoes were soaked through. Without saying a word, she took a detour after work and returned with a thick wool blanket and a waterproof poncho. She placed them next to him with a smile. "I hope this helps a little." James looked at the bundle, then at her eyes glistening. "No one has done something like this for me in years," he said quietly. That evening, for the first time, Sarah cried. Not because of pity, but because she realized how many people like James were out there. Kind, quiet souls who slipped through the cracks. Unseen, she started bringing him books-used paperbacks from thrift stores or ones she'd already read. They'd talk about the characters, the meaning behind the stories, and whether the author had gotten the ending right. It reminded him of the classroom. It reminded her of something she hadn't felt in years: connection. Soon people began noticing. A jogger brought a thermos of coffee. A mother let her child hand him a drawing. The bench, once overlooked, had become a quiet gathering place. But despite the growing attention, James never asked for more. He never spoke of needs or wants. He simply said, "Thank you." and kept breaking bread for the birds. One day, Sarah arrived at the bench to find someone else there. It's an older man with salt and pepper hair and a wary look in his eyes. "Are you here for James?" he asked. "I am," she said. "I bring him tea every morning." The man nodded. "I'm Thomas, his former student. I found him here last week. I'd been looking for him for months. He taught me how to read when I was 10, saved my life." Thomas explained that he'd come back to the city to find his old mentor. When he'd heard about an old man feeding birds on a bench, something told him it had to be James. "Did he tell you he used to stay late after class to tutor kids for free?" Thomas asked. He never wanted praise, just wanted to help. Sarah felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. She had only known James for a short time, but she realized something deeply profound. He wasn't just a man on a bench. He was someone's hero, someone's guiding light. After her conversation with Thomas, Sarah found herself seeing James in a new light. He was no longer just a lonely old man with soft eyes and gentle hands. He was a quiet ripple from another generation, a man who had once changed lives with nothing but chalk, stories, and compassion. Over the next few weeks, Thomas returned frequently to the bench. He brought old yearbooks, yellowed letters, and even a framed photograph from his elementary school graduation. James smiled warmly each time, recognizing faces from decades ago, remembering stories that only he could tell. "There's Rachel," he said one morning, pointing to a girl in the photograph. She was brilliant at math, but always doubted herself. "I told her once, you don't have to be loud to be powerful." She ended up becoming an engineer. Sarah listened quietly, amazed at how many lives this man had touched. Her mind kept returning to a single haunting thought. How could someone who had given so much be forgotten so easily? That night, she wrote a short post about James on her personal blog. She didn't expect much, just a handful of readers who followed her musings about city life and kindness. But by morning, the post had gone viral. Tens of thousands of people had read it, hundreds left comments. Some recognized James as their old teacher. Others shared similar stories about teachers who had changed their lives by the end of the week. A local news outlet reached out for an interview. Sarah hesitated at first, worried about exploiting James' privacy. But when she asked him, he simply chuckled. "If telling my story helps someone else be seen, then let's do it." The news segment aired on a Sunday evening. It featured James sitting on his bench, the birds fluttering around his feet, and a soft-spoken narration of his life and impact. Sarah watched it with tears in her eyes. The next morning, when she arrived at the bench, she was stunned. There were flowers, dozens of them, cards, books, handmade drawings from children. A local bakery had left bags of fresh bread for the birds, with a note that read, "For James, the kindest soul by the river." But that wasn't all. A woman approached with a hesitant smile. "Are you Sarah? I saw the piece. I wanted to say thank you." She explained that her daughter had been struggling in school. After watching the segment, they'd talked about kindness and resilience. That night, her daughter had asked to write a letter to her teacher, just to say thank you. "It's the first time in weeks," she smiled. The woman said, eyes glassy. One by one, people began visiting the bench not just to see James, but to connect, to share, to heal. It was as though the quiet kindness he'd planted for years was finally blossoming in full view. But beneath the joy, Sarah noticed something else. James was growing weaker. His hands trembled more. He coughed often. Sometimes he didn't show up until mid-morning, and when he did, his steps were slower. He brushed it off as just a cold or old bones acting up. But Sarah knew better. One evening, as she helped him fold his blanket, she asked gently, "Do you have a place to stay at night?" He smiled faintly. "The shelter 2 streets down gives me a cot when there's room. When there isn't, well, the bench has a decent view of the stars." The words broke in her. That night, she called Thomas. Together, they began making calls former students, old colleagues, charities, even the school board. Within days, a fund was created, the James Carter Legacy Fund. Its mission to support retired teachers in need and honor the quiet contributions of educators often forgotten. Donations poured in. Messages came from around the country. Some gave $5, others gave thousands. And all wrote notes like, "You taught me to love books. You helped me pass the 5th grade when no one else believed in me. You made me feel seen." Sarah printed every message. One morning, she handed James a thick folder filled with them. He opened it slowly, reading each one with misty eyes. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he whispered. "They never forgot," she replied. They were just waiting for someone to remind them. It wasn't long before the fund raised enough to secure James a small, warm room in an assisted living facility not far from the river where he could still visit his birds. Sarah helped move him in, arranging his books, photos, and a little radio that played classical music. When she asked how he felt, he simply said, "Grateful, but more than anything, full." And then, with a smile, he added, "Do you think the birds will come find me?" James didn't stop visiting the river, even after moving into his new room. On good weather days, Sarah would pick him up, wrap a scarf gently around his neck, and take him back to his favorite bench by the Charles. The pigeons still gathered around him as if nothing had changed, cooing softly as he dropped crumbs into the grass. His face, though more fragile now, seemed light and burdened. He often remarked, "I never imagined I'd see this part of my life feel so alive." Asterisk, the Legacy Fund, meanwhile, had taken on a life of its own. With Thomas helping on the administrative side and Sarah documenting the journey through her writing, more stories surfaced: teachers who had gone above and beyond, educators who shaped lives quietly in the background. One retired science teacher received a visit from students who built a ramp for her wheelchair. Another found a note from a former pupil taped to her door. "You gave me hope when I had none." James read every one of those stories with pride. "There's a whole world of people who've given so much," he said. "It's time they knew they mattered." One afternoon, while sitting by the river, James grew quiet. Not the usual calm, but the kind of stillness that makes the world hush around it. Sarah noticed his hand gently resting on the bench's worn wood. His eyes fixed on the water. "I think this bench gave me a second chance," he said softly. "It let me become visible again. Not just to others, but to myself." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded letter. The paper was worn like it had been opened and refolded countless times. "When my wife passed," he began, "I wrote this letter, but never sent it. I thought maybe it was time someone else read it." Sarah opened it with reverence. "My dearest Lillian, I miss your voice more than I miss sunlight in winter. I've grown quiet without you. But today, something remarkable happened. A young woman offered me tea, just like you used to on cold mornings." She smiled, and for a moment, I felt the warmth I feared I'd lost forever. "Maybe the world isn't done with me yet. Maybe you sent her love." Always, James' tears blurred Sarah's vision. She folded the letter gently, held his hand, and whispered, "She would be so proud of you." As winter approached, their visits became less frequent. Cold weather strained James' body, and his doctor advised against long outings. Still, Sarah visited the assisted living facility every week. She brought books, homemade cookies, and sometimes just sat beside him while he napped. One evening, she arrived to find his room unusually quiet. No music playing, no bird crumbs in the cup by the window. A nurse approached gently. "He had a good morning," she said. He read for a while, spoke about the birds. Then he rested. Peacefully, Sarah stepped into the room. The folded letter still sat on the windowsill, next to a notebook filled with sketches of birds and scribbled thoughts in his neat handwriting. She sat down, tears streaming silently. Not from regret, but from the weight of a beautiful, completed story. 2 weeks later, a memorial was held at the riverbank. Former students came from across the country. Local families brought flowers. Choir of elementary students sang softly. And in the place where he had once sat unnoticed, a bronze plaque was unveiled on the bench in memory of James Carter, who reminded us that kindness doesn't need a stage, only a seat by the river. The pigeons still gathered. Spring returned to the city slowly, gently, like a deep breath after a long winter. The grass near the river grew greener, and flowers bloomed along the pathway where joggers, dog walkers, and school children passed every day. And there, as always, stood the bench. Only now, it was never empty for long. A young father often sat there in the mornings, feeding his daughter bits of croissant and pointing out the birds. A retired nurse came by with a sketch pad and drew pictures of the river. And every so often, Sarah would sit in silence, a thermos of tea in hand, her fingers brushing the name on the bronze plaque. James Carter. The bench had become more than a seat. It had become a story, a meeting place, quiet reminder that even in the loudest, most chaotic world, kindness never disappears, just waits to be noticed. The James Carter Legacy Fund continued to grow with the help of Thomas, Sarah, and dozens of volunteers. It evolved into a foundation that offered housing assistance, medical support, and recognition awards for retired educators across the country. Every year on March 15th, what they now call Kindness Day, the foundation awarded one anonymous teacher with a grant and a letter thanking them for the difference they'd made. No one ever applied. No one ever asked. But somehow, the letters always found the right people. Sarah returned to her blog, now followed by thousands. She wrote about small moments, the barista who remembered your name, the child who offered his umbrella to a stranger, the old man who gave his bread, to the birds even when he had none left for himself. In interviews, people often asked her why she had stopped for James that day. I think, she would answer, I was the one who needed saving. One warm afternoon, a little boy approached the bench with his mother. He held a paper cup full of seeds and crumbs. She knelt beside him and read the plaque aloud, tracing the letters with her finger. Then they both sat down, and the boy began tossing the crumbs gently to the ground. From a tree branch above, a pigeon landed and waddled closer, and just like that, the story began again. Not loudly, not with fireworks or applause, but with a crumb of bread. A quiet moment, and the rustle of wings by the water. What remains of a life well lived? Not money, not fame, not even monuments, but stories and benches, and the way people remember how you made them feel. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Asterisk James Carter may have been just one man on a bench, but his life reminds us of something powerful. The smallest acts of kindness can leave the deepest impact. A smile, a warm cup of tea, a few words of encouragement, these things may seem simple, but they have the power to change someone's entire day, or even their life. Right now, somewhere. In your neighborhood, there's a James. Maybe it's a retired teacher, a neighbor who lives alone, someone sitting quietly in the background, waiting not for recognition, but for connection. So here's our invitation to you. Take a moment this week to reach out to someone who might be feeling forgotten. Share a kind word. Listen to their story. Let them know they matter, and if you've ever had a teacher, mentor, or elder who made a difference in your life, we invite you to honor them in the comments below. Tell us their name. Tell us what they did. Let's create a wall of gratitude right here, because sometimes remembering someone is the greatest gift we can give them. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Real Moments. Every week we bring you powerful, true stories of resilience, humanity, and heart. And if you want to support the quiet heroes in our communities, consider donating to a local educator fund, or simply writing a thank you letter to someone who once believed in you. Let's make kindness visible again. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next bench in the next story.